This is Max and Mia podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Max and Mia podcast. Good to have you here again.
So, today we are bringing back one of our favorite episodes. We did something like this a while ago, and honestly, the response was great. A lot of you really enjoyed it.
So, we thought, let's do it again. And the cool thing this time is that if you listen to that first episode, today is a chance to see how far you've come since then. How much has your English improved? Let's find out.
And if you're new here and never heard that one, no worries at all. This is still a great way to get a sense of where you are right now with the language.
Here's how it works. We have 2 short stories for you today. The first one is around the A2 to B1 level, and the second one is closer to B2. You listen, and you get a feel for what's comfortable and what's still a bit of a challenge.
And before we start, we want to remind you of something. Not understanding every word is completely normal. That's not a sign that something is wrong. That's just how language learning goes.
What matters is the big picture. What's the story about? What's happening? Who are the people? If you can follow that, you're doing well.
So if a word comes up that you don't recognize, keep going. Don't stop right away. A lot of the time, the context around that word will give you a clue. The situation, the tone, what came before it. All of that helps.
And if after listening there's still a word you couldn't figure out, then go back, write it down, look it up. That's a solid habit. But during the story, just stay with it.
Whatever you understand today, be proud of it. Progress in a language doesn't always feel obvious, but it's there. And English really does open up a lot of doors. The effort is worth it.
All right. Are you ready for the first story? Here we go. Okay. So the first story is going to be read by Max from start to finish. Just listen, follow along, and see how much you catch. Here you go, Max.
All right, here we go. The story is called Not Part of the Plan. Lucas was 29 years old and lived in a small apartment in the city. He worked as a graphic designer at a digital agency for almost 4 years. It wasn't his dream job, but he liked it. He had good colleagues, a decent salary, and a routine that worked for him. Nothing extraordinary, but stable. And at 29, stable felt like enough. Then, one Thursday afternoon, his manager called him into a meeting room. There were 2 other people in there that Lucas didn't recognize. The meeting lasted about 12 minutes. When it was over, Lucas walked out with a box of his things and no job. The agency had lost a big client and needed to cut costs fast. Lucas was one of 15 people who lost their position that day. His manager told him it wasn't about his performance. His work was good. There just wasn't enough money to keep everyone. Lucas nodded, said he understood, and walked to the elevator. He pressed the button for the ground floor and stared at the doors the whole way down. He went home, sat on his couch, and looked at his phone for a long time. He didn't know who to call. His parents would worry. His friends would try to cheer him up with things like, "Something better is coming," and he really wasn't in the mood for that. So he just sat there until it got dark outside. The next morning, he started looking for work. He updated his portfolio, sent emails, and applied to every open position he could find online. He got a few responses, went to some interviews, but nothing came through. One company told him they went with someone who had more experience. Another one stopped replying after the second interview. Weeks passed, then a month, then 2. To bring in some money, he started taking small freelance projects. A logo here, a social media post there. The pay was low and the clients were sometimes difficult, but it kept him going. His savings were around $800 at that point, and he knew that number wasn't going to last much longer. There were nights when he felt completely drained. Not just tired, but the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. He started questioning everything. Maybe design wasn't the right path for him. Maybe he needed to look for something completely different, something more stable, even if it meant giving up what he actually enjoyed doing. One afternoon, he decided to get out of his apartment and work from a coffee shop nearby. He needed a change of scenery, even a small one. He packed his bag, put on his jacket, and walked the 6 blocks to a place called Central Brew that he passed every day but never actually went inside. He found a table by the window, ordered a coffee, sat down, and opened his laptop. Outside, people were walking fast. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to be. He looked at his screen and tried to focus. About an hour later, the man sitting at the next table leaned over and asked if he could borrow a charger. Lucas handed it over. They exchanged a few words, and somehow the conversation kept going. The man's name was Andres. He was 34 and ran a small clothing brand with his brother. They were growing faster than expected and needed someone to help with their visuals, their website, their social media. Nothing too big, he said, but something real. Lucas showed him his portfolio on his laptop. Andres looked through it quietly, scrolling slowly, stopping on a few pieces. He asked a couple of questions about the process, how long certain projects took, what tools Lucas used. Then he put the laptop down and said, "Can you start next week?" It was a 3-month contract, 35 hours a week, with the chance to continue after that. The pay wasn't high, but it covered his rent with a little left over. Not perfect, but real. Working with Andres and his brother was nothing like the agency. The whole team had 5 people. Every decision mattered, and Lucas could actually see the results of his work. He had more creative freedom, but also more responsibility. There were hard days, days when things went wrong and he had to figure it out on his own with no one to ask. But for the first time in months, he felt like what he did actually made a difference. By the end of the contract, the brand had grown. Their online store went from around 200 visitors a day to over 900. Andres offered him a permanent position. The salary was a little lower than his old job, but not by much, and this time he genuinely wanted to show up in the morning. He called his mom that evening to tell her. She cried a little, which made him laugh. It wasn't the path he had planned, but somewhere between that elevator and that coffee shop, something had changed. He wasn't the same person who walked out of that meeting room with a box. And honestly, he was glad.
Okay, so that was the first story. Lucas, 29, loses his job out of nowhere and has to figure out what comes next. I really liked it. Max, can I ask you a few things about the story?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, so there were a couple of expressions in there that I think some listeners might have found tricky. The first one, you said it kept him going. What does that mean exactly?
Right, so keep going on its own means to continue, to not stop. But keep someone going is a little different. It means that something gives you just enough energy or motivation to carry on. In the story, Lucas was doing small freelance projects that didn't pay much, but they were enough to help him not give up completely. They kept him going.
That's a good one. So it's not that things were great, just that they were enough to keep moving forward.
Exactly. You can also use it in everyday situations. Like, I only had a coffee for breakfast, but it kept me going until lunch.
Very common, very useful. Now, I also want to talk about two expressions that I think could have been real traps for some listeners. The first one is when you said Lucas felt completely drained. That's not the most obvious word.
No, it isn't. If you didn't know that word, you might have gotten lost there. Drained means exhausted, but in a deeper sense. Not just physically tired, more like your energy is completely gone. The story even explains it a little. Not just tired, but the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. So even if you didn't know drained, the sentence around it was giving you a clue.
Which is exactly what we talked about at the beginning. Context is your friend. And the second trap was nothing came through. That one sounds simple, but it's easy to miss the meaning.
Right, because came through by itself can mean different things depending on the context. In this case, it means that nothing worked out, nothing became real. He applied for jobs, went to interviews, but nothing came through. No results, no offers, nothing concrete happened.
All right, and before we move on, just a quick reminder for everyone listening. If there was a word or expression in that story that you didn't quite catch, go back, listen to that part again, write it down, and look it up later. That's the habit. And remember, understanding the general story is already a win. You don't need to get every single word to be doing well.
Exactly. Step by step. Every word you learn today is one more than you had yesterday.
Okay, so are you ready for the second story? This one is a step up. We're moving into B2 territory now, so it might feel a bit more challenging. But you know what to do. Just listen, follow the story, and trust the process.
Let's do it.
Okay, this one is read by Max as well. Remember, this is B2, so it might feel a bit harder than the first one. But the same rules apply. Follow the story, trust the context, and don't stop at every word you don't know. Go ahead, Max.
This story is inspired by a real event. It's called 11 Days. On December 24th, 1971, a small commercial plane took off from Lima, Peru, carrying 92 passengers. Among them was a 17-year-old girl named Lena, traveling with her mother to spend the holidays with her father, a biologist who worked deep in the Amazon rainforest. An hour into the flight, the plane flew into a severe thunderstorm. Within minutes, it broke apart in the air. Lena regained consciousness on the jungle floor, still strapped to a row of seats. She had fallen thousands of meters and survived. Around her was complete silence, broken only by the sound of insects and distant rain. She had a broken collarbone, deep cuts on her arms and legs, and only one shoe. She was entirely alone. For the first few hours, she didn't move. The shock was too great, and her body refused to respond. She called out several times, hoping someone else had survived nearby, but there was no answer, just the jungle. But as the light began to fade, she understood that staying still meant dying. She had grown up visiting her parents in the Amazon. She wasn't a trained survivalist, but she remembered things her father had told her. Find a river and follow it downstream. Water leads to people. She found a small stream the next morning and began walking along it. The jungle was overwhelming. The vegetation was so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground. Every step required effort. The humidity was suffocating, and the insects were relentless. She had no food, no clean water, and no way to communicate with anyone. The days blurred together. She drank water directly from the river, knowing the risk, but having no other choice. She ate small berries she recognized from her childhood visits, avoiding anything she wasn't completely sure about. She lost track of time. Some days she walked for what felt like hours and barely covered any distance. At night, she covered herself with large leaves and tried to sleep despite the sounds surrounding her in the dark. The jungle at night was a different world, loud and restless, and she never fully got used to it. On the fourth day, she came across the wreckage of part of the plane. She found some candy that had survived the crash and a small bag with a few basic items. It wasn't much, but it gave her enough energy to keep moving. She also found other passengers who had not survived, which was deeply distressing. She said a quiet word for each of them and continued walking. By the seventh day, her wounds had become infected. The cuts on her legs were particularly bad. She noticed small insects laying eggs in one of them, something that would have horrified her in any other situation. But she had read about this in one of her father's books. She carefully cleaned the wound using water from the river and kept moving. Stopping was not an option. On the 10th day, the stream she had been following merged into a wider river. The current was stronger, the water darker. She was exhausted and feverish, but the wider river meant one thing: a greater chance of finding someone. She built a basic raft using branches she found along the bank, though it barely held together, and used it to float downstream for several hours before the current became too strong. She abandoned the raft and continued on foot along the riverbank. That evening, she spotted a small wooden structure partially hidden by trees. It was a shelter used by local workers. Inside, she found fuel, dried food, and a basic medical kit. She treated her wounds as best she could, ate and slept for the first time without fear. The following morning, 3 men arrived at the shelter. They were local loggers who used it as a resting point. When they saw Lena, they were stunned. She had been missing for 11 days. The plane crash had been in the news across the country, and nobody had expected any survivors. They took her by boat to the nearest town, where she received medical attention and was eventually reunited with her father. Of the 92 people on that flight, Lena was the only one who survived. When asked later how she managed to keep going through those 11 days, she said she never stopped thinking about her father waiting for her. That, and the fact that she kept moving even when every part of her wanted to stop.
11 days. Alone in the Amazon. I mean, every time I hear a story like that, I don't know how someone does it mentally. It's incredible.
And what makes it even more remarkable is that she wasn't a survival expert. She was a teenager with some knowledge her father had passed on to her. That was it.
Exactly. Okay, I have some questions. First one, you used the expression regained consciousness. That one might have caught some people off guard.
Right, so to regain consciousness means to wake up after being unconscious, after passing out, or, in this case, after a traumatic event. Regain means to get something back, and consciousness is your state of being awake and aware. So if you put them together, she got her awareness back. She woke up, basically, but in a much more serious context. You wouldn't say, "I regained consciousness this morning" when your alarm goes off.
That made me laugh. Yeah, context matters a lot with that one. Okay, second thing, came across. That one came up when Lena found the wreckage.
Yeah, come across means to find something by chance, without looking for it specifically. She wasn't searching for the wreckage. She just stumbled upon it while walking. You can use it with objects, or even people. I came across an interesting article. I came across an old friend at the supermarket. It's a very natural phrasal verb.
I use that one all the time, without even thinking about it. Now, there were 2 words in this story that I think are worth stopping at. The first one is relentless. You used it to describe the insects.
Yeah, relentless means something that never stops, that keeps going without any break or mercy. In the story, the insects were constant. They never gave her a moment of peace. You can use it in a lot of contexts. A relentless rain, a relentless competitor, a relentless schedule. It always has this sense of something that just doesn't let up.
I love that word actually. It's one of those words that sounds exactly like what it means. And the other one, overwhelming. The jungle was overwhelming.
So, overwhelming describes something that is so intense or so big that it's hard to process or handle. It doesn't have to be negative either. You can feel overwhelmed by a beautiful view or by how much you love someone. But in this case, yes, the jungle was so dense and so vast that it was almost too much to take in. For Lena, it wasn't just physically difficult, it was mentally a lot to handle too.
Okay, and before we wrap up, we want to say something to everyone who found the second story harder. That is completely normal and honestly expected. This was B2 level content, and if you're working your way up from B1, there will be words and structures that don't click yet. That's not a problem. That's just where you are right now. And where you are right now is not where you'll be in 3 months or 6 months if you keep showing up. You don't need to understand everything today. You just need to understand a little more than you did yesterday.
And honestly, the fact that you sat through both stories and tried, that already puts you ahead. Most people give up before they even start. So give yourself some credit.
All right, we want to hear from you. How did it go? Tell us in the comments. Did you find the first story comfortable? Did the second one feel like a stretch? Did any of those words or expressions surprise you? We genuinely want to know.
And if you enjoyed this episode, leave us a like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help more people find the podcast, and we want this community to keep growing.
We'll be back soon with more content. Until then, keep listening, keep learning, and don't be too hard on yourself along the way.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.